What's up everyone, the Game 2K2 here once again. I don't know why, but ever since I did my review on the Spider-Man franchise, I've been on this huge comic book kick. So today I'm going to look at another big comic book movie franchise, Batman. Now before I begin, let me just tell you that I'm a huge Batman fan. I love the comics, I love the cartoons, and I love most of the games. To me, he's the best comic book hero ever, and today we're going to be seeing how well he's been treated in theaters. So let's start with the very first movie. Now, I know this would actually start with the 1966 film, but I would rather do the franchise that I was raised on, so we're going to start with Tim Burton's 1989 film, simply titled Batman. The story centers around Batman, who is slowly but surely scaring every criminal in Gotham, but many deny his existence except for two reporters. It also focuses on the Joker, who is a gang member who has accidentally dropped into a huge pool of chemicals, which gives him his clown-like face. Throughout the rest of the movie, we see the Joker gain more and more control over the gangs in Gotham while Batman tries to stop him. Before Tim Burton's Batman, everyone's previous thoughts on Batman related to the campy and lighthearted TV show from the 60s, but Burton was very interested in bringing the character into the darker and more intense world than that of the 60s show. Burton succeeds in almost all aspects of the movie. The film is wonderfully shot with a full-size Gotham set designed specifically for the movie, and the casting and acting in the film is top-notch, with Michael Keaton making a spectacular Batman and Jack Nicholson giving a tremendous performance as the Joker. Now, besides being dark and gritty, it's also quite campy as well, which is exactly how the comics were in the early years of Batman. One aspect about the movie that fans questioned was that there was no Robin, but in all honesty, Batman in the comics did ride solo for quite a while. Robin wouldn't get introduced until well after Batman's debut. While I do like the movie's story, there are a few setbacks. One is the movie's loyalties to the comic, which does go back and forth. Tim Burton, while very interested in making this Batman loyal, still wanted to add a few twists to the movie. One of the twists that enraged longtime fans was that he made the Joker the murderer of Bruce Wayne's parents. If this was an ordinary movie, this twist would be considered perfect. But it's a comic book adaptation, and having the Joker being the murderer is light years off from the comics. Like I said before, the casting for the movie is actually perfect. Michael Keaton surprised everyone with his performance as Batman. His Bruce Wayne is not the best, but once he's in the Batman suit, he's awesome. Also, Jack Nicholson is a great Joker. A lot of people have complained that he wasn't psychotic enough, but I honestly don't know what they're talking about. The man laughs like crazy, looks like a clown, and wants everyone in Gotham dead. What's not psychotic about that? The rest of the supporting cast is pretty good. I like Michael Gough as Alfred. I felt he performed the character well. Kim Basinger as Vicky I didn't initially like, but after watching the movie a few times I began to like her more. Her character is a bit cliché, but she plays it well. The action in the movie can be both entertaining and dull. The fight scenes between Batman and the Joker's henchmen is very entertaining, and the Batplane scene is incredible for 1989. However, the action scene that's a bit of a letdown is the car chase with the Batmobile. Don't get me wrong, I love this version of the Batmobile, but one of the issues with the set that they built is that the car can never gain any speed, so what's supposed to be a big car chase has the cars going at about 15 miles an hour. But overall, I love Batman. There are a few setbacks, but just the epic feel that the movie has overshadows all those flaws. Now we move on to Batman Returns. Despite being lukewarm about returning, Tim Burton did eventually agree to do another Batman movie, but producers gave him a little more free range with the story. The story this time sees Batman going against three villains, the two main villains being Catwoman and Penguin, and a third villain, a rich businessman named Max Schreck. The Penguin being a disfigured orphan who is raised by penguins and later joins a circus freak show which terrorizes Gotham. Catwoman is a woman named Selina Kyle who works for Max Schreck and hates her life. Things don't get any better when she is thrown out of an office window by Max, which is the last straw for her, and now she wants revenge. While the first Batman had a pretty simple plot with Batman versus the Joker, this plot is a little more uneven. The amount of characters that they throw in is too much for one movie and makes the story very hard to follow. Some of the story I like, some I don't like. Also, one of the common complaints was that it was too dark in tone. But it's actually not. In fact, I thought the tone was perfect. I do like the stories behind Catwoman and Penguin. I was very surprised in how well Catwoman turned out in this film. Female villains from comic books, for some strange reason, do not transfer well to film. The only other female villain that I liked was Mystique from X-Men. The others come out really bland. Michelle Pfeiffer nailed the role perfectly without a single flaw, easily becoming one of her best, if not her best, performance. The Penguin got a few comic book fans talking because the Penguin from the comics was the more sane and really the more normal out of all the villains in Batman, while Tim Burton's version was very deformed and very sick. His personality was also more violent in the movie as well. To be honest, I actually prefer this version of the Penguin over the comics. I just feel there's more personality with this version. Plus, Danny DeVito was just perfect for the role. Not many directors can make a character both villainous and sympathetic and do it well, but Tim Burton does it perfectly with those two characters. I wasn't really impressed by Max Schreck's story. Where Catwoman and Penguin had very dynamic stories, Schreck was kinda straightforward and cliché. We don't really get to know him, and that's my ultimate problem with that character. He's just introduced and made the villain. That's it. Don't get me wrong, I thought the performance from Christopher Walken was good, but the character he plays just comes off as kind of faceless when compared to everyone else. The action in Batman Returns I don't find to be as good as the first film. Granted, the first film had its issues as well with the action, but Tim Burton's flaws when it comes to action does kind of show more in Batman Returns. Not that it's terrible, it's just too ordinary. I know that might sound weird, but there's nothing really gripping or striking about the action. I think the only scene that sticks out in my head is the Batmobile mowing through cars. That was pretty good. So overall, with Batman Returns, it's kind of hit and miss. I love a lot of what it does, but it's a little cluttered in a few areas. Now we move on to Batman Forever. After Batman Returns didn't receive the major success of the first film, Warner Brothers wanted Burton out of the director's chair and chose Joel Schumacher to take his place. The intention with Batman Forever was that it would cater to the younger audience, but still try to please the older fans as well. The story centers around Batman squaring off with Two-Face and the Riddler. Two-Face, who is Gotham's former district attorney turned villain after being covered by acid, which has burned off half of his face. The Riddler, who is actually one of Bruce Wayne's former employees, who is angry that Bruce does not accept one of his inventions. And this would also mark the first movie in the franchise to feature Robin, a boy who loses his family thanks to Two-Face and is adopted by Bruce Wayne. Now, while the story still possesses some of the grittiness from Burton's work, it's a lot more kid-friendly and comedic. It did take me a while to get used to this change, especially since I had gotten so used to Tim Burton's work. When it comes to the villains, I'm pretty mixed up about it. The Riddler's story isn't bad. For one, I do commend the writers for at least giving him an understandable story. Mainly because in the comics, the Riddler's story has had to go through so many changes because DC writers were having trouble writing for the character during his first appearances in the comics, and had to rewrite him several times until they got a character that stuck. There were moments in the comics when he did work for Bruce Wayne, so the screenplay writers used that, but changed it quite a bit for the movie. Jim Carrey was actually perfect for the role and steals the show with his comedy. Two-Face's character I was very disappointed with. Out of all the villains in Batman, he had the most backstory, and yet has very little in this film. While I accept that the Riddler would be comedic, I do not accept that Two-Face would be comedic. In fact, Two-Face is just as, if not more comedic than the Riddler in this movie, which is a huge problem. Tommy Lee Jones is one of my favorite actors, but I have nothing good to say about him in this movie. Then, of course, we got Robin's story, which I actually do like. I was very worried that the entire thing would be one big joke, especially considering the tone that the rest of the movie was taking, but the writers did a good job in keeping it serious. However, I think the only problem I have with it is that they cast Chris O'Donnell in the part. Nothing against O'Donnell as an actor, but the story is written to where a boy loses his family and he's adopted by Bruce Wayne. That story is fine, but the boy looks almost as old as Bruce Wayne himself, so that's kind of weird. Then, of course, we got Val Kilmer replacing Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne / Batman, and while I think his Bruce Wayne is better, his Batman is a bit off. I think it's his appearance in the costume that bugs me. He's got the voice right, but Keaton had a tough look when he was in the costume, while Kilmer looks more like a sissy. Now, one element of the film that Joel Schumacher does do well is the action. The action is a little more well thought out than Burton's films. Granted, I could do without the lame fight scene during the Riddler's party where Batman is fighting in front of everybody at the party, but the rest is pretty cool. But overall, it's not as good as Tim Burton's work, but it's not bad either. The comedy can go a bit too far, especially when it comes to Two-Face, and I think some of the casting doesn't work out too well, but it's still not a terrible movie, and is worth watching. Now we move on to Batman and Robin. After Batman Forever proved to be a pretty good box office hit, Joel Schumacher was brought back. However, this time the story sees Batman and Robin going against Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. Mr. Freeze, who is a man trying to find a cure for his dying wife, however, after an accident in his lab, he can now only survive in cold weather. Poison Ivy, who is also a scientist, is poisoned by her boss, even though he initially tried to kill her, after she witnesses him performing an experiment that created a new character called Bane. However, after being poisoned, she is a villain and Bane is her sidekick. Her and Freeze eventually team up in the movie and combat Batman and Robin. Okay, I'm going to try and be nice. With Batman and Robin, it was clear that Warner Brothers was just after toy sales and other merchandise, because the movie doesn't even try to create anywhere near a decent story. While Batman Forever at least retained some of the gritty elements from the first two films, this movie doesn't have any of that, which almost makes it feel like it's part of a totally different franchise. Okay, now to the film's credit, it does do one thing right, and that's Mr. Freeze's backstory. Very loyal backstory for Mr. Freeze, even though, much like Two-Face from Batman Forever, it is very brief, but they at least kept it very close to the comics, which says a lot when you compare it to the rest of the movie. Now, as far as Arnold Schwarzenegger's performance goes, I like the more dramatic elements with his wife, and how he wants to save her, but some of the dialogue during fight scenes is tough to listen to. Then we move on to Poison Ivy. Now, Poison Ivy's origins was revised twice in the comics. This version follows the one that most people knew, and that was her working for Dr. Jason Woodrue. However, the huge difference is that her poisoning was actually part of an experiment and not murder, as this movie shows. But her powers are at least close to what they were in the comics. There was a little more explanation on her kiss in the comics, but that's not a huge issue. Poison Ivy is played by Uma Thurman in this film, and she does pretty well for what's written for her, but it's written so poorly. It's tough to take her seriously in this movie, and that's really the big problem. I'm not even going to go into detail about Bane. I was so upset when I saw his character and how he was portrayed in this movie. The only thing I can say is that he was a smart character in the comics that's nothing more than a brainless imbecile in this movie. Then, of course, we have our heroes. Val Kilmer is replaced by George Clooney, and Chris O'Donnell returns as Robin. George Clooney shouldn't even be in action movies, period. His Bruce Wayne stinks, and his Batman is even worse. He doesn't even try to disguise his voice as Batman, which is weird. Then there's Robin, who's nothing more than a 20-year-old acting like a 10-year-old, and I'll leave it at that. Oh, and did I mention that we also have Batgirl in this movie, played by Alicia Silverstone? I'd go into detail, but I don't want to. So overall, it's pretty easy to see why this killed off the Batman franchise for a while. This is an embarrassment to film, period. They didn't even try with Batman and Robin. In fact, I don't think it's fair to call it a film at all. It's an hour-and-a-half toy commercial, because that's literally what it is.